Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Out and Explore with John. Normally on these adventures, I try to get out and stay away from the crowds, but unfortunately today we're going to have to do the exact opposite, and we're going to have to make our way into the crowds as we are here today at the Tidal Basin in Washington, D.C., and we're going to go and view the cherry trees. It's Sunday morning, March 26th, and it's about 7 o'clock, and the crowds are already in full swing here. So we're going to, the plan is we're going to take one lap around the Tidal Basin and check the views of the trees from all different angles, and then we're going to try to get out of here before it gets too crazy. Along the way, I'm going to share with you the story of how the cherry trees in the Tidal Basin came to be. Most people are familiar with the beauty of the cherry blossoms, but few know the history of how these trees came to surround the Tidal Basin. The effort to bring the cherry trees to Washington, D.C. preceded the official planting by several decades. Way back in 1885, Eliza Skidmore returned from Japan and approached the U.S. Army Superintendent of the Office of Public Buildings and Grounds with the idea of planting cherry trees along the reclaimed waterfront of the Potomac River. Skidmore, who would go on to become the first female board member of the National Geographic Society, was rebuffed, though she would continue proposing the idea to every superintendent for the next 24 years. Several cherry trees were brought to the region by individuals during this period, including one that was at the location of a 1905 cherry blossom viewing and tea party hosted by Skidmore herself in northwest Washington, D.C. Among the guests was prominent botanist David Fairchild and his fiancée Marion, the daughter of inventor Alexander Graham Bell. In 1906, Fairchild imported 1,000 cherry trees from the Yokohama nursery in Japan and planted them on his own property in Chevy Chase, Maryland. The Fairchilds were pleased with the results of their planting, and in 1907 began promoting Japanese flowering cherry trees as an ideal tree to plant around the avenues of the Washington area. Then, in 1908, Fairchild donated cherry saplings to every D.C. school that year to plant on its own grounds in observance of Arbor Day. Then, the movement begins to build steam when in 1909, President William Howard Taft and his wife Helen received a letter from Mrs. Skidmore, detailing a plan to plant cherry trees around the Tidal Basin. Mrs. Taft responded to the letter by agreeing to the plan. The Japanese consul was told about the plan and offered to donate approximately 2,000 trees. In 1910, the trees arrived in Washington. Unfortunately, the Department of Agriculture discovered that they were infested with insects. After learning this, President Taft agreed to have the trees burned. The mayor of Tokyo and others from Japan decided to donate another batch of cherry trees to the U.S. Capitol. So, in March of 1912, approximately 3,000 more trees arrived in the district. Mrs. Taft and the Japanese ambassador's wife planted the first 2 saplings on the northern bank of the Tidal Basin. Those trees still stand today with a small plaque commemorating the event. Then from 1913 through 1920, the workmen continued planting the Yoshino cherry trees around the Tidal Basin. In 1935, the first Cherry Blossom Festival was sponsored jointly by many civic groups and became an annual event in subsequent years. It has continued to grow every year to the large festival that it is today. So there you have it, a somewhat abbreviated history of the cherry trees in the Tidal Basin. Now let's continue on and enjoy them together.
I feel like somebody made that. Mama time.
Well, that's about all we have for today. We made it all the way around the Tidal Basin. It's about a 2-mile loop around there. The trees were beautiful. The crowds were getting pretty crazy, so I would certainly recommend getting here early. And if you can, I would also recommend taking the metro because the traffic is pretty bad down here. Hope you enjoyed the sights and the scenery, and hope to see you in the next video. Because like I always say, you never know what you're going to get when you get out and explore with John.